Hello everyone, and welcome back to Conspiracy. Today we're actually going to be covering a topic that my roommate suggested. In a way, it's actually kind of funny. I have a content bank that has like a list of things that I want to make videos on, and I put this subject in the content bank, and then 2 days later my roommate was like, hey, you should make a video on this. So I took it as a sign to make the video now instead of waiting and doing it later, and here we are. We're going to get into it. I hope you enjoy. Grigory Rasputin, born January 21st, 1869, to Yefim and Anna Rasputin in a small village called Pokrovsky in Russia. His parents named him after Saint Gregory of Nyssa, whose feast was celebrated just 11 days before his birth. His father was a peasant farmer and church elder who had been born in the same town. He was also a government courier, taking people and goods between Tobolsk and Tyumen. His parents had 8 children, maybe 9, but we'll get to that in a second, 7 of which died in infancy or early childhood. The possible 9th child would have been Feodosia, who Rasputin was actually close to and was the godfather to her children. However, the records that have survived from that time only tell us that they were close, and we can't confirm that they were siblings. Rasputin's childhood is pretty much a black hole of information, and almost nothing is known about it. With that said, we can speculate, however, that he was not formally educated and probably remained illiterate well into early adulthood, as most Siberian peasants were. Local records that did survive suggested that he might have been an unruly youth, involved in drinking, minor theft, disrespect of local authorities, etc. In 1886, at the age of 17, Rasputin traveled to Abalak, about 2,800 kilometers east of Moscow, where he met a peasant girl by the name of Praskoeva. After a brief courtship of less than a year, they married in February of 1887. His wife stayed in the small village with their 3 children that survived out of the 7 that they had throughout all of Rasputin's travels, and remained devoted to him until his death. Spoiler alert, Rasputin, born in 1869, dead. In 1897, Rasputin had grown interested in religion and left his wife to go on a pilgrimage. While his exact reasons of the decision to go on a pilgrimage is unknown, according to some sources, he left the village to escape punishment for a horse theft. Other sources suggest that he had a vision of the Virgin Mary or of Saint Simeon, while other sources still suggested that the pilgrimage was inspired by a young student. Regardless of the reason, Rasputin decided he was no longer going to be a peasant and he would cast off his old life. He was 28 and had been married for 10 years at this point. According to historian Douglas Smith, his decision to leave could only have been occasioned by some sort of emotional or spiritual crisis. Rasputin had taken shorter pilgrimages earlier, but the 1897 trek to St. Nicholas's Monastery changed him. There, he was profoundly humbled by an elder by the name of Makary. While records at the time are still shaky, it is said that he stayed there for several months at least and possibly learned to read or write there. However, he did eventually leave, and I'm not joking. You will never guess his reason for leaving. So he left and left a complaint with the leader of the monastery. He said that the monastery was too homosexual. I'm not joking. He pretty much just complained that the monks were gay and then he left. Either way, he returned to his wife a changed man. This is where he started looking more disheveled and started behaving differently. He became a vegetarian, swore off alcohol, and prayed and sang much more fervently than in the past. Rasputin then followed up this journey with years as a holy wanderer, again leaving his wife for months or years at a time to wander the country, visiting a plethora of holy sites. By the early 1900s, Rasputin had developed a small following, mostly of family members and other local peasants in the town. They would pray with him on Sundays and other days when he was in town. This, however, wasn't particularly popular with the local priest, as that's kind of how he makes his living. It is rumored that he joined the Kallisti, a religious sect whose ecstatic rituals were rumored to include orgies. However, this might have just been slander, as historian Joseph Furman said that the repeated investigations failed to establish that Rasputin was ever a member of this sect, and the rumors appear to have been unfounded. Word of Rasputin began to spread in Siberia during the early 1900s. At some point, around 1904 or so, he traveled to Kazan, where he gained a reputation as a wise holy man who could help people resolve their spiritual crisis. Rasputin made a favorable impression on the father of the Seven Lakes Monastery outside of Kazan, and the father and two others gave him a letter of recommendation to Bishop Sergei and arranged for him to travel to St. Petersburg. Upon arrival, he met Bishop Sergei and was introduced to other church leaders, including Theophan, who was well connected in St. Petersburg society and even served as the confessor to the Tsar and his wife later on. Theophan was so impressed with Rasputin that he insisted he stay with him in his home. He became one of Rasputin's most important and influential friends in St. Petersburg and gave him access to influential parties. Alternative religious movements had become popular among the residents before Rasputin's arrival, and many of the people were curious about the occult and the supernatural. Rasputin, being quite the unique individual, made him the subject of curiosity among the St. Petersburg elite, who at the time were bored, cynical, and seeking new experiences during this period. His appeal may have been due to the fact that he was a native Russian, unlike the other self-described holy men who had been previously popular in St. Petersburg. Rasputin had formed friendships with several members of the aristocracy who were instrumental in introducing Rasputin to the Tsar and his family. Rasputin first met the Tsar on November 1st, 1905. The Tsar recorded the event in his diary, writing that he and his wife had made the acquaintance of a man of God, Gregory, from the Tobolsk province. Rasputin returned home shortly after and did not return to St. Petersburg until July of 1906. When he did return, he sent Tsar Nicholas a telegram asking to give the Tsar a gift. He met with Nicholas and Alexandra on July 18th and again in October, which is the first time he met their children. Around this time, the royal family became convinced that Rasputin possessed the power to heal Alexei, their sons, but historians disagree over when exactly it happened. This is where the story of Rasputin begins that I'm sure more of you will be at least partially familiar with. At least this is the part that I learned in school, for some reason. The majority of Rasputin's influence within the royal family was due to Alexandra and the others believing that he had, on several occasions, eased the pain and stopped the bleeding of Alexei, her son, who had hemophilia. Alexandra had a passionate attachment to Rasputin, and he became an indispensable member of the royal entourage. There is no definitive time frame as to when Rasputin learned about or even first healed Alexei's hemophilia. When Alexei had internal hemorrhaging in the spring of 1907, however, Alexandra summoned Rasputin to pray over him, and Alexei recovered the next morning. There are rumors that Rasputin was capable of faith healing ever since he first arrived in St. Petersburg, and the Tsarina's friend, Anna, became convinced that Rasputin had miraculous powers shortly thereafter. Anna would become one of Rasputin's most influential advocates. In the summer of 1912, Alexei developed a hemorrhage in his thigh and groin area after a rocky carriage ride, which caused hematoma. It's just like a big bruise, kind of like internal bleeding. It's just like a ginormous bruise. With severe pain and being delirious with fever, Alexei appeared close to death. In a final effort to heal her son, Alexandra asked Anna to send Rasputin, who was at home at the time, a telegram asking him to pray for Alexei. Rasputin immediately sent back a telegram that said, "God has seen your tears and heard your prayers. Do not grieve, the little one will not die. Do not allow the doctors to bother him too much." While Alexei's condition remained unchanged the next morning, Alexandra was in high hopes that Alexei would not die, and his bleeding stopped the following day. Dr. Fedorov, one of the doctors who was attending to Alexei, said that the recovery was wholly inexplicable from a medical point of view. The doctor also later admitted that he couldn't blame Alexandra for seeing Rasputin as a miracle man, and said Rasputin would come in, walk up to the patient, look at him, and spit. The bleeding would stop in no time. How could the Empress not trust Rasputin after that? Historian Robert Massey has called Alexei's recovery one of the most mysterious episodes of the whole Rasputin legend. I don't know why I said that. Rasputin's not a legend, he was a dude, he's real. The cause of the quick recovery is unclear, but Massey speculated that Rasputin's suggestion to not let doctors disturb Alexei had in fact aided his recovery by allowing him time to rest and heal, or that it aided his recovery by calming Alexandra, thus reducing the stress on Alexei. Alexandra believed that Rasputin had performed a miracle, and concluded that he was essential to Alexei's survival. Some historians even believe that Rasputin stopped Alexei's bleeding on other occasions through hypnosis. Alexei and his siblings were taught to view Rasputin as a friend, one that they could confide in. In the fall of 1907, the children's aunt was escorted to the nursery by the Tsar to meet Rasputin, and she noticed that all the children seemed to like him and that they were completely at ease with him. His friendship with them is evident through the telegrams that he sent them when he was away. He sent the 9-year-old Maria the following: "My dear M, my little friend, may the Lord help you carry your cross with wisdom and joy in Christ. The world is like a day. Look, it's already evening. So it is, he cares of the world." In February 1909, he sent all the children a telegram saying, "Love the whole of God's nature, the whole of his creature, in particular this earth. The Mother of God was always occupied with flowers and needlework." One of the girls' governesses, Sophia, was horrified that Rasputin was permitted access to the nursery when the girls were in their nightgowns. She wanted Rasputin barred from the nurseries, and in response to the complaints, Tsar Nicholas did ask Rasputin to end his nursery visits. Alexei's 12-year-old sister, Tatiana, wrote a letter to her mother in response, saying, "I am so afraid that Sophia can speak about our friend something bad." Alexandra eventually had Sophia fired. Sophia then took her story to other members of the family who were shocked at their reports themselves, though Rasputin's contact with the children were, by all accounts, innocent. Tsar Nicholas's sister was horrified by Sophia's story. She wrote on March 15th, 1910, that she could not understand the attitude of Alex and the children to that sinister Gregory, whom they considered to be almost a saint, when in fact he is only a Klist, a holy man. He's always there, goes into the nursery, visits Olga and Tatiana where they are getting ready for bed. It's there talking to them and caressing them. They are careful to hide him from Sophia, and the children don't dare talk to her about him. It's all quite unbelievable and beyond understanding. Another one of the nursery governesses claimed that in the spring of 1910 she was forcibly sexually assaulted by Rasputin. Her name was Maria. She had at first been a devoted follower of Rasputin, but later was disillusioned by him. The Empress refused to believe her and said that everything Rasputin does is holy. Grand Duchess Olga was told that Maria's claim had been immediately investigated, but they caught the young woman in bed with a Cossack of the Imperial Guard, and was later let go in 1913. It was rumored around town that Rasputin had seduced not only the Tsarina, Alexandra, but also their 4 Grand Duchesses. Pornographic cartoons circulated that depicted Rasputin as having sexual relations with the Empress. Tsar Nicholas then ordered Rasputin to leave St. Petersburg for a time, to the displeasure of Alexandra. In classic Rasputin fashion, he left and went on a pilgrimage to Palestine. Despite the scandal, the royal family kept their association with Rasputin until he was, spoiler alert, murdered. Now you know that not only is he dead, he's murdered. With the royal family's belief in Rasputin's healing power, he had a considerable status and power at the court. The Tsar appointed Rasputin as lamplighter, charged with keeping the lamps lit before religious icons in the palace, and this gained him regular access to the palace and the royal family. By 1906, Rasputin had become close enough to ask for a favor from the Tsar. Rasputin asked that he be allowed to change his name to Rasputin Novoy, which means Rasputin New. Tsar Nicholas granted the request, and the change was speedily processed, suggesting that Rasputin already had the Tsar's favor. Rasputin used this position to full effect, accepting bribes and sexual favors from admirers, and actively working to expand his influence. He soon became a controversial figure. He was accused by his enemies of religious hearsay and forcible sexual assault. He was also suspected of exerting political influence over the Tsar, and was rumored to be having an affair with Alexandra. Opposition to Rasputin's influence grew within the church. In 1907, the local clergy denounced Rasputin as a heretic, and the Bishop of Tobolsk launched an inquest into his activities, accusing him of spreading false doctrine. In St. Petersburg, Rasputin faced opposition from even more prominent critics, including the Prime Minister and the Hokhrana, who are the Tsar's secret police, kind of like the Secret Service. The Prime Minister ordered an investigation into Rasputin's activity and confronted the Tsar about him, but did nothing to rein in Rasputin's influence. In 1909, another woman accused Rasputin of sexual assault. She went to Theophan, from earlier in the video, one of his spiritual leaders, the one that suggested he could meet with the Tsar. And this incident helped convince Theophan that Rasputin was a danger to the monarchy. Rumors then multiplied that Rasputin had assaulted female followers and behaved inappropriately on visits to the royal family, in particular with the Tsar's teenage daughters. World War I, the disillusion of feudalism, and a meddling government bureaucracy all contributed to Russia's rapid economic decline, and they laid the blame on Alexandra and Rasputin. In November 1916, Vladimir Purishkevich said that the Tsar's ministers had been turned into marionettes whose thread had been taken firmly in the hand of Rasputin and the Empress Alexandra, the evil genius of Russia, and the Tsarina, who has remained a German on the Russian throne and alien to the country and its people. Alexandra was born a German princess, so that's why he was saying that she remained a German on the Russian throne. On July 12, 1914, a peasant woman attempted to assassinate Rasputin by stabbing him in the stomach outside of his home. He was seriously wounded, and for a time it was unclear if he would survive. However, after surgery, he recovered. A group of nobles decided that Rasputin's influence over the Tsarina threatened the empire, and they came up with a plan in December of 1916 to kill him. Rasputin was murdered during the early morning on December 30th, 1916, at the home of Felix Yusupov. He died of 3 gunshot wounds, one of which was a close-range shot to his forehead. Little is known about his death beyond this, and the circumstances of his death have been the subject of speculation. This is how historians are pretty sure it went, however. Felix had invited Rasputin to his home shortly after midnight and ushered him into the basement. He then offered Rasputin tea and cookies, both laced with cyanide. He initially refused the cookies, but then later decided to eat some. To Felix's surprise, Rasputin was unaffected by the poison. Rasputin then asked for some wine, which had also been poisoned, and drank 3 glasses, again unaffected. At 2:30 a.m., Felix went upstairs where his co-conspirators were waiting. He took a revolver and returned to the basement. He told Rasputin that he'd better look at the crucifix and say a prayer, referring to a crucifix that was in the room, then shot him once in the chest. Felix and co. then drove to Rasputin's St. Petersburg apartment. One of them was wearing Rasputin's coat and hat in an attempt to make it look to the neighbors as if Rasputin had returned home that night. When they got back to Felix's house, Felix went to the basement to ensure that Rasputin was dead. Suddenly, as if in a movie, Rasputin jumped up and attacked Felix, who, with some effort, escaped and ran upstairs. Rasputin followed him into the palace's courtyard where he was shot again. He collapsed into the snowbank, and conspirators wrapped his body in cloth, drove it to the bridge, and dropped it into the river below. Rasputin's body was discovered under the ice on January 1st, 1917, about 200 meters downstream from the bridge. No water was found in his lungs, meaning that he was thrown into the river post-death. Rasputin was buried the next day, January 2nd, 1917, at a small church in Tsarskoye Selo. The funeral was attended only by the royal family. Rasputin's wife, mistress, and children were not invited, although his daughters did meet with the imperial family later that day. The royal family planned to build a church over his gravesite. That would never come to pass, as his body was exhumed and burned by a detachment of soldiers shortly after the Tsar renounced his throne in the wake of the Russian Civil War. The reason given for burning his body was so that his grave would not become a rallying point for supporters of the old regime. And here we are. We're at the end. That's the story of Rasputin. Fun little fact about one of his daughters, she actually moved to France after the October Revolution, then moved to the United States, where she worked as a lion tamer in a circus. The most famous depiction of Rasputin in media is probably the 20th Century Fox movie Anastasia. It paints him in a not so historical light, however. Dude's got one eye and is friends with a bat. I hope y'all learned something and that y'all enjoyed the video. Do you think that Rasputin had such great influence over the royal family that he deserved to be assassinated? Again, I hope y'all enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate each and every one of you. I'll catch you in the next one.